Hello everybody and welcome to Cleaner, Quieter, Healthier, the added benefits of transport decarbonisation. I'm Susan Claris, I'm a transport planner at Arup and I'm also Vice President of Living Streets, and I'm chairing today's session in which we look at how active travel, by which I mean walking, wheeling and cycling, can help us to achieve net zero. Put some video on. So we will be looking at the wider benefits that come from decarbonising transport, including health improvements, better air quality and thriving local economies. This event has been developed in partnership between the UK Government and Living Streets, which is the UK charity for everyday walking. Active travel is a central pillar to delivering the UK's zero carbon commitment, as outlined in both the UK Government's net zero strategy and the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. And this is also demonstrated by the fact that the UK Government is hosting this event in the UK Pavilion on this Transport Day to talk about active travel. The Prime Minister's Gear Change Plan for England, which was launched last year, and the unprecedented £2 billion of investment that was announced alongside it, with a vision for half of all journeys in towns and cities to be cycled or walked by 2030, demonstrates that the government is serious about enabling more people to walk and cycle more often. The Prime Minister reiterated his commitment to walking and cycling in his Gear Change 1 Year On report, which was published in July, and the Chancellor repeated this in his budget speech on the 27th of October, when he announced £710 million of new dedicated funding for walking and cycling over the Spending Review 21 period. This, on top of other funding streams, such as the £5.7 billion City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement for combined authorities, delivers the £2 billion of funding for cycling and walking over this Parliament promised by the government. While active travel policy is devolved in the UK, the administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all have similarly ambitious plans for enabling more walking and cycling, and you will hear more details from Alison Irvine regarding the work being delivered by the Scottish Government. At Living Streets, we want to create a nation where walking is the natural choice for everyday local journeys. For over 90 years, we've been a beacon for walking. From our early days, our campaigning led to the UK's first zebra crossing and speed limits. Now, our campaigns, local projects and initiatives, such as our Walk to School campaign, encourage millions of people to walk more. The video, which you can see playing here, shows WOW, our Walk to School challenge, and there are over 1,300 schools nationwide taking part in WOW. On average, Walk to School rates in WOW streets increased by 23%, with a 30% reduction in cars at the school gates, helping to avert 190 kilograms of CO2 per WOW school each year. We'll hear more from our panellists about interventions like this that are helping people walk, wheel and cycle more, along with the benefits that we experience when we prioritise active travel. I'm going to ask our panellists to briefly introduce themselves, and we'll then see a short video from Dame Sarah Story, Active Travel Commissioner for South Yorkshire's Mayoral Combined Authority, before starting our panel discussion, which I hope you'll find interesting and inspiring. So if we can move along the line to our panellists, if they can just give their name and title as a brief introduction, that would be great, starting with Pete, please.
Hello, my name's Pete Zanzotera. I am the Active Travel Programme Director for South Yorkshire, and my boss is just about to be up on the video.
Good morning, my name is Alison Irvine. I'm the Director of Transport Strategy and Analysis at Transport Scotland, and delighted to be here today to talk to you a bit about the things that we are doing in Scotland.
My name is Sharon Dijksma. I'm the mayor of Utrecht. This is the fourth largest city in the Netherlands.
Utrecht, very jealous. My name is Chris Boardman. I am the Transport Commissioner for Greater Manchester.
I'm Patrick Vallance. I'm the Government Chief Scientific Advisor in the UK.
That's great, thank you. And we'll move to the video now. Hopefully. Press the button again.
Welcome to Cleaner, Quieter, Healthier, the added benefits of transport decarbonisation. This event will look at the benefits that come from switching our short car journeys to ones done on foot or by bike. And as well as discussing the environmental benefits of this panel will also be discussing the wider benefits that come from enabling people to choose to leave their cars behind more often. So whether that's better air quality, thriving local economies, better physical or mental health, or quite simply safer streets for us all, there's never been a more important time to have this conversation. And I have one question that's constantly asked of me, and that is whether or not it really is true that the answer to all our problems is to replace every vehicle that we currently drive with an electric one. And of course, you may well guess this, my answer to this is no. It's not the only answer. We really do have to look at the way that we get to the point where we have fewer vehicles and we have them driven less often. Electric vehicles still produce emissions from their brakes and from their tyres, and those particles that are released are still damaging to our health. So we need to create safer streets that people are feeling more likely to want to get out and walk and cycle on. And if we have all of our current vehicles as electric ones, our streets will still be clogged and dominated by cars, and they won't feel any safer than they do now. Creating safer streets and creating places where people can live without being reliant on their cars is also very important. If everyone could have all of the amenities that they need within a 15 to 20 minute walk or cycle, then we could drive down reliance on motor vehicles almost overnight. We'd also be able to create healthier habits for future generations. And we know that whilst most primary school children do walk to school, our reliance on walking as a form of transport dwindles as we get older, to the point now that it's not really seen as a major form of transport. Yet every morning we'll all leave our front doors on foot or in our wheelchairs and we'll go somewhere. And ideally we want that to be past the door of our vehicle and either getting on our bike or getting onto public transport for the journey that we're going to make. I hope you really enjoy this session that you're about to hear, and you hear the points of view from the panel as they discuss many of the different ways that we can ensure our local economies thrive again as the pandemic eases, and we find ways to keep footfall high in our local high streets and places where we're perhaps seeing shops closing and places where we're perhaps not used to seeing as many people due to the restrictions that we've been living with over the past 18 months or so. I hope you have a great session, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what other people have to input into this and taking that back to the work that I'm doing in South Yorkshire with the Mayor Dan Jarvis to turn our region into a place where it's more likely that people will choose to walk or to cycle for their short journeys. Of course, we're part of a bigger team and we can all play our small part in helping to contribute to this particular agenda. If everyone was able to switch just one journey a week to a more sustainable mode, then that would be a 20% improvement during the working week. If we added together all of those improvements in the aggregation of the concept of marginal gains, a sporting term, then we would see gradual improvements being added together for a more significant impact. So thank you for your questions and contributions to this session, and a huge thanks for the panel for taking part as well. It's bye from me.
That's great. Hopefully that's got everyone thinking more about active travel and that the discussion is not all about EVs. It is about walking, wheeling and cycling as the building blocks for decarbonisation. So I'd like to start, please, to open up the panel discussion with the first question to Sir Patrick, which is why should we switch our short journeys to walking and cycling, and how will this help us meet net zero targets?
Well, I think as Sarah said, I mean, we know that cars are used a lot for short journeys where there is a perfectly sensible alternative for many people. And those alternatives of walking and cycling provide all sorts of benefits beyond the obvious one of reducing carbon emission. There's a health benefit to the individuals as well. I think there's a societal benefit to having people out and about and sort of meeting each other. And we know that if you look at the total contribution to greenhouse gases from transport, in 2019 it was 27% of total emissions came from transport, about 10% from road transport. And we know that in cities this is a particular problem. So, as Sarah said, EVs are really important. They are important. There's no question we should be moving to electric vehicles, but they are not completely free of any emissions. We've got emissions from brakes and tyres as well, and we've got other aspects that she mentioned on her short video. So I think that active transport is crucial. We need to recognise, of course, it's not possible for everybody, and so we've got to be mindful of that. And the really key thing in all of these transitions to a greener economy is the green choice needs to be the easy choice. The moment it's not the easy choice, the barriers are enough to make people do other things. So are the pathways such that it's easy for people to walk? Are the cycle lanes such that it's easy for people to cycle and feel safe? These sort of infrastructure issues become really important, and without those, you're putting in barriers that will cause problems. So I think this is an absolutely crucial part of what we need to do. And I think to just a final point, in again, picking up on what Sarah said, small changes by all of us, aggregated across millions or across the globe, hundreds of millions of people, make a significant difference. They're not the answer on their own, but they're part of the solution, and this is a critical one.
Thank you for that. Would any members of the panel like to add to that, particularly focusing on the why we should switch our short journeys to walking and cycling? Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it was eloquently put and covered all the bases, and I think to build on that, or to pick up on a specific point, we won't get out of the car unless what we see out the window looks easier. And if we accept that as a hard and fast rule, because it is, then what we build has to be easier, and that's quite difficult. But in Greater Manchester, just using that, about a third of our emissions are from transport. So it's actually really high. And we have just under 250 million car journeys every year of less than a kilometre, which is both embarrassing and also quite exciting. Just look how little that we actually have to change. And I think more than anything else, that cycling and walking have all of those spin-off benefits. And I think we need to include them, and we'll look at those when we're making investments to change. And ultimately, it makes a nicer place to live. But while it takes bravery to trundle to the shops on a bike or just cross a street, then we'll keep running the kids to school in a car. And that's what we're striving for, that it doesn't take bravery to walk to school.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, Alison, do you want to?
So, nothing to disagree in what's been said so far. I think the additional point I would like to make is around the socio-economic impacts of this issue. So the research that we have shows that lower income groups tend to be disproportionately impacted by the disbenefits of car traffic, whether that's through severance, taking away space for people, poorer air quality, or increased accidents. So not only is this good for the planet, not only is it good for our health, but actually it's really important about improving people's lives. And that and those kind of just transition principles is a really important part of the work that we will be rolling out here in Scotland.
Okay, and maybe to build on that answer, Alison, I said there has been a lot of talk about moving to electric cars. What's your view on where we should be focusing our decarbonisation efforts?
So that's quite an easy one, Susan. Actually, the answer to that is we need to focus on all of it. We need to do absolutely everything that we can to electrify all parts, or decarbonise all parts of our transport system through technology. But actually, the behaviour change piece is just as important, and probably much more challenging to deliver. I think, as Chris has alluded to, from a political perspective, it takes courage and boldness sometimes to make the changes that we need to see. So,
okay. Pete, is there anything you'd like to add to that in particular about sort of what does more walking and cycling offer us?
Well, it offers us a real get-out from the health crisis that we find ourselves in. It's somewhere near a third of children leaving primary school are classed as overweight and obese in this country. And I remember in the early 2000s when Britain overtook Germany as being the fattest nation in Europe, and it's something that we should hang our heads in shame about, really, because we live in a small country, and just like Chris, 26% of the journeys under 500 metres in South Yorkshire are done by car, which is a fantastic target to go at, but is embarrassing, really. I suppose the only other thing that I'd add to that is that we do need some brave politicians, but we need politicians and leaders that lead by example. And that my decision to cycle and take the train here is not one that I want to be offset by somebody driving. My decision not to fly anywhere is not something I want to be offset by somebody flying somewhere else. And I think that kind of brings us down to that last piece of this, that owning a car is not a right. 30% of households in South Yorkshire don't have a car. It is a privilege, and it's a privilege that we should earn and we should see as a privilege. So if we do own a car, we should think about all of the people around us that are impacted by the way in which we drive. And that is a long way from the behaviours that we see out on the road right now. You know, there are far too many people driving with a sense of entitlement and bullying other people off the road. So I know Chris will probably come back to how we might change that on side roads.
Chris, do you want to respond to that now?
Well, one of the things that we were just discussing before we started is that we've gathered some evidence now, a very comprehensive study that shows side road zebras. It's a facility that's used across the world, and indeed in all private land in the UK and supermarkets. Essentially, a side road zebra is a zebra without Belisha beacons and zigzags. It's a simple tool across the mouth of side roads, the desire line for pedestrians, that reinforces the right, because it is the right of pedestrians, right of way at that point. And it's a subtle but critical thing. And how does that connect to climate change and to health? Well, it's the difference between a parent running their child to school in the car for a few hundred metres and a kilometre, or saying, well, go on then, you can walk, but make sure you wait till the cars stop. And that's one I absolutely dearly love to use. And the evidence we've just gathered, surprisingly, shows that crossings make crossing the road safer. About just under 70% more drivers stop when they're there, and it doesn't increase danger. And it's a very effective tool. So we're really hoping that the Secretary of State will allow us to expand those trials massively long term, so we can give people what they need to make walking easier than driving.
That's great, thank you. I'd like to bring Mayor Sharon into the discussion now about Utrecht, a place that I'm very happy to say I visited 4 years ago, I think now, and loved it. So Utrecht is leading the way in the shift to active travel. So I'd be interested to know what advice you would give other towns and cities to decarbonise their transport, please.
Yes, that would be great. I mean, I would say let's talk about strategy, because we're here now preaching to the converted, right? So that's great, but now you need to take the next step. How do we do this? And first thing is that you have to bring your citizens on board. Without public support, you're nowhere. So it is not only about convincing people on the benefits of using, for instance, the bike or being a pedestrian. It is not only about making it more convenient for people, but I think it is also about a long-term persistent strategy and a real vision on your city. So we have this 10 minutes concept, in which we say that in Utrecht you need to be from one part to the other in the city, probably 10 minutes by bike. Sometimes you need to use an electric bike. We got a lot of them in the Netherlands, but you have to be able to do this. So what we did is we reorganized the city. Street by street, actually, we do this. And then we make the pedestrians and the cyclists the kings of the road, so to say. And the cars are just the visitors. And some places are not even able to be reached by cars. So in that way, you gently convince people taking other means of transport. Public transport is well organized. We have, for instance, for the cyclist, the biggest underground parking lot for 12,500 cyclists right under the central station. And it's heavily used. And we even have a highway for cyclists also down there, so that you can take the shortcut, stay dry when it rains, and be fast at another part of the city. One of the issues of the benefits is not mentioned yet. It's not only about health, as in being on the move and fighting obesity. It's also about air pollution. I found out that this is even a better argument to maybe do something for people, because I could, even in Amsterdam, where I was a deputy mayor and had the portfolio of rearranging all the transport into the agenda of cyclists and pedestrians, that we found out that for instance, young children living at places where the highways are near die faster. I mean, your life is really much shorter when you live in an area with a lot of pollution, and nobody knows. So we try to make a public campaign almost about it, to tell people, look, if you have all these cars, they pollute, and they make they are a slow killer, a silent killer, and you don't even feel it. But all the people with asthma, etc. So I would say you have to have a real strategy, a vision on how to organize your public space, also make benefits for it. When we, for instance, take away parking spots for cars in the city, we do this. It gets hundreds and thousands of parking spots out of the city. And what we give back to the people are places for children to play, safer roads, more space for cyclists and pedestrians. We green the parts of the roads. We make more space for recreation, for instance. So we really give something back. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to do in order to be convincing. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, to me, that all makes perfect sense, as you might imagine. But have you encountered much opposition over the years or not?
I have to say that we are also a bit lucky. Utrecht is not only the fastest growing city of the Netherlands, it's well educated. I think that the level of education is pretty high. And so there are a lot of parties also in my council which have a relation on sustainable environmental policies. At the same time, I have also people in my city who are rather poor, and for them, for instance, having a car is a privilege that they don't want the government to take away from them. And I need to take them on board too, because they're also my citizens. And what I try to do is to bring them in the discussion and to see also where we can have like an approach which has a relation to the suburb or the area we're in. So there are places where we can build new houses with 0.3 parking spots per person. That is our aim for new places where we build. There are other parts of the town where it just goes a little bit slower, and that's okay. I mean, so you need to have a different approach for different areas and bring people in and let them discuss about it. So there is always opposition, but if you have a good strategy and a clear vision, then at least people can understand why you are doing these things. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, really important. So both in Utrecht, but also in Amsterdam, there is big public support. But what we have seen is that, for instance, the rest of the country was mocking about us. These crazy people in Utrecht, they take away all the cars from the streets. Why? And then I was having opposition, and then I asked some person, where do you live? And then the person would say Oorschot, somewhere deep down in Brabant, for instance. And then I would say, why are you discussing with me about my city? You're not even living here, right? Mm-hmm. Let's have this discussion with our own citizens, and they agree.
Okay, thank you. So Patrick, were you wanting to add something?
Well, I really wanted to ask a question about... It sounds as though in Utrecht one of the things you've done is avoid a problem that can occur, which is you stop cars going down some streets and you end up with many more going down other streets, which just causes a different problem. You've managed to sort of get rid of it completely, presumably by linking to the rail network, as you've said. So it's an integration question. And then the second thing, I'd just be interested in your view on noise as well. What's happened to noise?
Yeah, good questions. The first thing really happens. So if you would shut down streets, then you see a shift. And so we try to have a public transport system and also a bicycling system which really adapts to this. But we're not there yet, right? So we see this problem that you actually need to maybe slowly but surely discuss about paying for using some of the areas in the city when you are with the car. This is something that we are discussing upon with our national government, because they are the ones who are responsible for this policy. And what you see is that they are in denial right now. But I'm convinced that it is not so long that they can stay in denial anymore. Because in the Netherlands we are highly densely populated. We have too many traffic jams, and we need to have a model shift, actually. And we are able to do this, but there is still opposition to the idea. And I can understand that. But at the same time, I know that if we are not making this move, then we will be stuck in our cars, sitting and waiting. We have a high economic loss also with all these traffic jams. So it is actually not in our benefit to just stay in denial. So I have high hopes that we are, as cities, allowed in coming years to maybe experiment a little bit with things that in like Nordic countries, and even I think in London already exist. So this is also part of our strategy. And what we try to do is, for instance, also discuss with employers. They are also influencing the workers' way of transport. So if they would make it attractive for their workers to use public transport or get a bike with some tax cut, for instance, then it's also the more convenient way. So we use all means, tax, organizing public transport, organizing public space, etc., to get our goal. It is not one single issue, actually. It is a broad vision, and you have to, like with an old radio, you have to be touching all those things to make it work, right?
That's great. Thank you for that. And I think the point you made about air quality is really important. And I'm always minded of the phrase that the best way to talk about transport is not to talk about transport. It's to talk about the outcomes that you can achieve. So I'd particularly like to hear from Pete and from Chris about what the wider benefits that we can use to talk about when we're talking about improving walking and cycling. You know, not talking about widening a footway or putting in a cycle lane. From your experience, what benefits have you found the most persuasive, I guess, when talking to people about walking and cycling improvements?
Well, listening to that's fascinating because I think one of the things that we did 4 years ago at the start was quantify what's the cost of doing nothing. It's the choice that we never measure properly. What is it costing us to travel the way we are now? And the whole city region is 3.75 billion a year to travel as we are now. And it sounds like a ludicrous figure, and you break it down and you look at, okay, there's 800 million cost in collisions on the road, and you look at the pollution, you look at the congestion, and certainly the health, which is huge. And altogether it's 3.57 billion. And so the question is, can we afford that? And it's getting worse. So once you've gone, no, we can't, okay, then everything switches to, the question switches to, we have to change. So how do we do it in the most palatable way? How do we do it in the most constructive way? And the benefits are across the board. If somebody said to me, there's an easier way to do it where you don't have, I'd just go home. But I've seen that cycling and walking, it is just such a sturdy soapbox to stand on, because it touches on pretty much every major crisis that we have. But it's hard, and it's all political and cultural, because we have to stop doing what we're doing now. And so changing the language, so we don't say you can't park on a pavement, we say you have to leave room for a parent with a double buggy. I can relate to that, I can go along with that. We don't talk about the health benefits. All of the data you need, it's the foundation, but nobody buys a house because of the foundations. You know, it's something that you need, but we talk about how much money will you save. So I've just had an experiment giving up my car for 2 years, and it saves me £7,000 a year. When all of the costs are properly accounted for, £7,000 a year, I really don't want to have to buy another car now. And it's not easy, because we're not there yet, but the benefits are manifold and across our society. And it makes a nicer place to live. And I know Utrecht. I've done a film about Utrecht. I visited there when the Tour de France started there a few years ago.
We'll have the Vuelta next year.
The Vuelta next year, I know. It's just a frustratingly excellent place. And the piece finished with, we didn't see a single cyclist. We just saw normal people doing normal things in normal clothes. They just happened to be doing it without cars.
Maybe it's also important to, what I am always thinking about is how can we also involve young generations? And this is also a cultural thing. So we need more as politicians, I guess, to make cycling look like cool, right? So, and in the Netherlands, we have this tradition of being a cyclist because this is just the way we are. All children at 4 or age of 5 learn this without the extra wheels. And
I hate you already.
Yeah, very good. Keep on hating me. So what it takes is that you bring in also like influencers. We have some of this new cycles, bikes like Van Moof, which are like extremely cool. They're also extremely expensive. You cannot afford it. But I mean, we bring in this also as a kind of how do you say this, temptation. Because young people just want to be part of what is hip and happening. And in our city, it is hip and happening to be on your bike. I mean, if you are in an old car which is polluting, you're just not cool anymore. So that is also something which we need to bring in much more, bring in the social aspects and also the aspects of the mind and how to influence people in a positive way.
Thank you for that more temptation. Pete, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. People, I think people are something like plants. We actually would like to lay our roots down in places. And although we talk about transport, this is more about places and creating places that people want to live, know their neighbours, and want to be part of that community. And when we create those kind of communities, what we get is a more circular economy where people go to their local shops, they buy things and set up their own businesses. If you look at the really go-ahead places in Sheffield, in London, across our country, they are places where people sit in cafes and think of ideas and set up .com, God knows what businesses, but they set up those businesses. And what we tend to be creating is not that at the moment. We're still very car dependent, despite it is a minority of the population in England that drive, but that minority tend to dictate things. But if you turn that on its head, if you go to the local communities, you will find that 60-odd%, 2/3 of people in most communities would like less traffic. So how do we do that? Well, we start with places like the schools, and Sharon's quite right. If you involve the young people and start talking to those, they overwhelmingly would like to walk to school. The majority form of transport in Britain is walking. It has been, and it still will be. And that's one of the frustrating things about this debate about electric vehicles and all that kind of thing. It tends to eclipse the obvious that happens in our communities. And one of the most amazing things that's just recently happened in Barnsley and Doncaster, and I don't know how many people have been to Barnsley or Doncaster in here. Yeah. Oh, great. We've got some people that have been there. Barnsley and Doncaster have been trialling school streets. And that trial has gone so well that there are now lots of schools, more schools, that would like to have a school street. That's a closure of the street, first temporary, but then more permanent, and to remove traffic. And I think nearly everybody agrees. If you go out in Barnsley and Doncaster and go on these school streets, myself and Sarah were there last Friday, you find that the residents, the parents, the staff, the children all agree that having loads of cars outside the school is not nice. They don't all agree on what the solution is, but they all identify with the problem. And that's where we can seed our active neighbourhoods around that. And I think one of the most heartening things that came out of low traffic neighbourhoods in London was there was an overall decrease in car trips. That we tend to model everything on car trips being displaced and moved somewhere else. But actually, when we make nicer places to live, some of those car trips just evaporate. And if you think about it sensibly, those of us that have children, if we don't watch it, we spend our lives ferrying our children away to dance classes and everything in the car.
Can I bring Alison in, actually? Sorry, some of the positive changes that you've seen as well. It'd be really interesting to hear from your perspective, particularly the changes that have taken place as a result of the pandemic.
So I actually think a couple of points I wanted to bring in, if that's okay, and it builds on that kind of community and place perspective that we've been talking about. So Scotland has 7 cities, but actually it's a nation of small towns, and it has a vast rural area. So just listening to what you were saying, Sharon, about bringing citizens with you, part of the challenge that we have is to be able to demonstrate to the people that live in our small towns that don't have the access to the goods and services that they want, or in our rural areas, how walking and cycling can be part of their everyday life and their everyday journey as well. And some really interesting things, I think, coming out of this conversation around how you change the conversation with people, how you make it about community-based, how you don't talk about transport. That is going to be my key learning from today. Very challenging as a transport planner. But nonetheless, there is lots of exciting things that we're doing in Scotland to try and bring up that kind of community-based ethos, and particularly challenging the younger generation. So school streets, yes, doing that. Free bikes for children that can't afford it. We've got pilots on for that, because actually accessibility to that mode of transport is just as important as creating the right kind of infrastructure. And all of the kind of the backstop measures that you need to support that. And then free buses for under 22s, which is due to come into play in Scotland as of January next year. Walking to bus stops is equally, or wheeling is part of that overall journey. So you can see that we're starting to put the building blocks in to deliver on the rhetoric and deliver on the strategy. But if anyone has got any gems of ideas for tackling rural areas or some of our smaller communities, then I would be delighted to.
Now, maybe we should consider more thinking about how travellers work. And what we have in the Netherlands is a big discussion on last mile. Because what you try to do is maybe make or create hubs towards those areas where there is public transport. So maybe you should allow people in rural areas to obviously take the car for a small part of their trip, but use, for instance, the rest of the trip towards London or the big cities in public transport. So be more like adaptive in your strategy, and not try to I mean, when you give them a personal taxi, that would be the other thing, but that is so costly, you cannot afford it, right? So you need to think about ideas in making a model shift, maybe even within the trip. So partly taken by maybe the car, and the rest of it by public transport, and having we have this sharing bike concept, which you can have from stations. They are heavily used. Okay. Many people use them for the last mile in the city.
Can I stop you? Yeah, we will need to finish on time. And what I want to do is to give each speaker 1 minute, please, to respond to the fact that people will choose the most inviting method of transport for them. How do we make this walking? So if each speaker can respond to that in 1 minute, that should then give me 40 seconds to wind this up. If we can start with Sir Patrick, please. 1 minute on how do we make it walking?
Yeah, well, you make it nice. And people have talked about how to make it nice, and it's something where you will not have to cross dangerous roads. It's something where you feel comfortable in doing it. You've got space to do it. You've got greenery around you to do it, and you've got the chance to do other things like meet people and do the things that you want to do along the way. And I think worth remembering that with people working from home more, with the ability from Zoom and all the other technologies, actually we're going to need to do this more, because there's going to be less commuting in and out of cities and towns than there has been, and more local.
Make walking nice. That's a good starting point. Chris, what's yours?
You'd think I've thought this out in advance, but I haven't. Essentially, building on that, what we see out of the car window has to be at least as attractive as driving, otherwise people won't get out. Commit to doing it. Government transport policy at the moment is sensational. Gear change, bus back better, but that now has to be followed through and stuck to, and we will change a nation if that is the case. But ultimately, we would need to make sure that it doesn't take bravery to cross a street or ride to school, that it's actually, the journey is a pleasant thing to do, and that means junctions, protected space, all of those bits, and it will simply make a nicer place to live.
Great, thank you. Sharon?
Well, actually, I have not really much to add. I think that you should just make temptation part of your strategy, give people really a choice to choose for the better option also for them and for the society as a whole. And that it takes a lot. I mean, it is not a small agenda. And school streets, for instance, is a quite good idea to start with. Because I have seen that many people get convinced then that it is really good that there are no cars in the neighborhood of the schools. Also from a safety perspective. Many children who have accidents with cars came from parked cars between and then just suddenly step on the road, right? All parents, I have 3 children, are afraid of this. This is your nightmare, right?
Yeah.
So you have to work with parents also on this.
Great. Thank you. Alison?
So 2 things to add. I say, first off, we need to reduce the amount of cars on our roads. And that's part of the kind of fundamental part of our drive towards decarbonising transport in Scotland. And then the second part of that is actually about building on the make it nice, actually make the goods and services that people want to access within that kind of walking isochrone, whether that's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you'll choose whatever that is, but actually make it possible for people to live their lives that way. And I will leave it at that, Susan. Thank you.
Spoken as a true planner, I like that. And Pete, you probably have the hardest job coming last after that, but we've heard about making it nice, we've heard about temptation, we've heard about reducing car dominance, what I refer to as transport gluttony. What's your minute?
So there's just one group of people that have really been omitted from this. Our work with South Yorkshire has shown that probably about 20% of people are disabled or have some kind of impairment. And during the pandemic, those people have been really hard hit. They haven't been out very much. And when they do go out, they find the pavements are blocked by vehicles parking on them and all that kind of thing. And I think that the thing that is crucial for us in South Yorkshire is to make our infrastructure inclusive. So make our cycle lanes wide enough for 3- and 4-wheel bikes, make our footways wide enough for somebody to walk next to somebody. Every vehicle in the land is designed so that you can sit next to somebody, so why shouldn't we make our footways wide enough for people to be accompanied when they walk? I'd say that is the biggest piece of learning that we've done, and make our infrastructure wide enough for those people that we want to use it, and don't stick them in a small corner that's obstructed.
Great, thank you. And that's a good point to end. The importance of inclusion and making sure that walking and wheeling and cycling is for everyone. With Living Streets, we're doing a report called Walking for Everyone, which will be launching next year to improve the walking experience for everybody. So to conclude, I'd really like to thank the panel for their contributions today, and thank the audience, both the people in the room and people who have joined us via the live stream. And if you've got any questions that you've got left, because I appreciate we didn't have the opportunity for people to ask questions, but if you want to find out more about Living Streets or our work, then please talk to us after this session, or you can look at the website, which is livingstreets.org.uk, for more information and for contact details. So thank you very much for coming along. It's been an absolute privilege to have a session here that is talking about active travel, talking about walking, which I believe is the most important mode of transport. So walk happily, enjoy your day, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you.